some of the things that we're going to be talking about today, these are just kind of some guiding questions that will summarize what we're going to be talking about today. How is AI or artificial intelligence changing teaching and learning in our schools? So depending on where you are, you might have heard about ChatGPT and other AI apps. Are you having conversations in your schools? Are you wondering how this might be changing what you might be doing from a teaching and learning perspective? So we'll explore that today. What skills should schools focus on given the evolution of AI? Are we currently teaching reading and writing? How will that change or evolve with the evolution of artificial intelligence? How does concept-based promote understanding in a literacy classroom? And so we're going to explore what elements of concept-based might help with this evolution of artificial intelligence. And finally, how do we assess for understanding when students are using tools like ChatGPT? So that's going to be some broad questions that we're going to be focusing on today. Before we get started, I don't know, you might not know me, and so I want to let you know a little bit about myself. I'm here, as I said, in the United States, but I am originally from Egypt. My parents are from Egypt, and so I speak Arabic fluently and English and maybe a little bit of French. A few years ago, I had the privilege of moving to the United Arab Emirates, and that really was where I was introduced to the IB, to the International Baccalaureate, and kind of where my concept-based journey started, as IB framework is a conceptual framework. And so I worked actually as an MYP English teacher in a school in Abu Dhabi, actually Al Ain, which is a suburb of Abu Dhabi. And then I moved from an MYP teacher to a diploma coordinator and taught extended essay and theory of knowledge. And again, through that journey, I heard a lot about Dr. Lynn Erickson and Dr. Lois Lanning and some of their work. And so when I came back to the United States about maybe 10 years ago, I met Rachel French, and she was doing a concept-based inquiry workshop. And I've always wanted to engage in the concept-based curriculum instruction 8-day institute. And so in 2019, my husband and I decided that I'm going to register for that institute, and we're going to travel to The Hague together, and we're going to enjoy 8 days of learning about concept-based curriculum and instruction. But then the world had a different plan than we did. And so COVID-19 hit, and that in-person experience was canceled, of course. And Rachel decided that she was going to do the institute over virtually. And for the longest time, I actually was like, I don't learn very well virtually. I'm just going to wait until it's in person again. And I think it was only 3 days before the institute started virtually that I decided to just bite the bullet and do the virtual experience. And it was one of the best experiences I've had as an educator, and really changed the way I look at teaching, learning, and assessment from a conceptual perspective. And so 3 years later, I think it's been 3 years later, I am now certified Erickson and Lanning concept-based curriculum instruction trainer and workshop leader. I also, if for those of you who are part of the collaborative with PLI, you might see me every other Thursday during one of the coaching slots where I work with teachers, and we discuss lots of really cool questions. We've discussed ChatGPT several times, and I work with teachers on their units. I've also been really privileged to work with Tiffany Brown, who co-authored Concept-Based Literacy Lessons with Dr. Lois Lanning. And another one of the graduates from that first year of the Institute, Evita Flock, we co-authored the grade 3 to 5 and grade 6 to 10 literacy course that's available in the collaborative for those of you who are part of the collaborative. I started also as an English teacher, but in the last couple of years have been teaching Middle East studies to 11th and 12th graders here at my current school. So I ventured in the realm of teaching history. I have a really unique experience in that I actually literally taught in all 3 IB continuums. I taught PYP when I came back to the United States. I've taught 5th and 6th grade ELA and math. And as I said, I've taught MYP and DP. So I really have a solid understanding of the conceptual framework within all 3 of the IB continuums. Personally, I am a mother of 2 young adults, an 18-year-old son and a 19-year-old daughter. And because they're a little older, it allows me to spend some time on some of this work that I very much enjoy. So that's a little bit about me. Before we get started, I wanted to just give you guys a couple of reminders. If you've been in some of the master classes from before, we do ask that you please not take any screenshots or recordings of the work that's here. Do take plenty of notes for your own personal use. If you've registered for this masterclass, you will get a link so that you can be able to view the class again over the next couple of weeks. Because of the number of people that register, it's such a blessing. There's 1,000 people that are registered for this masterclass, and PLI has a small yet dedicated team. We are no longer issuing certificates for attending this masterclass. But at the end of this session, I'm hoping to give about 10 minutes for you guys to ask questions. So please do put them in the chat. And like Rachel said, she will collect them, and we will have a nice little discussion at the end of this session. So without further ado, I'm going to start with our very first guiding question, which is, how is artificial intelligence changing teaching and learning in our schools? You might have had a lot of conversation with your fellow teachers or admin, or your school might be engaging in some of these discussions already. And we might be sitting here and thinking, my gosh, what are we going to do with this new evolution? And really, when you really think about it, AI and ChatGPT and AI, they're not really new to us. They have been around for at least half of a decade. I didn't know this until I actually was working to prepare for this masterclass. But ChatGPT, this is actually its fourth iteration, the one that we're currently using, or the one that you've currently heard about. They have released precursors to it in 2018, 2019, and 2020. And OpenAI, which is the company that owns ChatGPT, was actually founded in 2015. If any of you have used Google Docs or text messaging, you might have noticed that as you're writing in your email or you're writing in your text message, there are recommendations that the phone might give you or the app might give you of the next word or finishing your sentences. That's called adaptive and predictive text tools. And so that's been around for a really long time. So these are things that are not new. And in fact, adaptive and assistive tools were first developed in the 1980s to assist people with disabilities. So again, this idea is not a new idea. It feels like it's a new idea because maybe of the way that is being generated around this time. And with technology being generated, we typically kind of go into a panic and say, oh my God, this is going to change teaching forever. Teaching is never going to be the same. And we've had this panic in the past. And I will tell you, ChatGPT isn't the first or the last time for us to have this type of panic around technology generating the generation of technology. If you think back in the 1980s, with the advent of the calculator, we all thought, oh my God, kids are never going to have to add and subtract. They're never going to have to learn how to multiply and divide. Calculators are going to change the way we educate and teach. And really, it didn't do that. It was a tool that we learned how to use. I remember the SAT, was like no calculator can be used on the SAT exam. And now it's being used more and more because it's just a tool. If you were in college like I was in the 1990s and the search engine came out and with Google and Yahoo and whatever they were, you might have thought like, oh my God, the search engine is going to change the way we do teaching. Research is not going to be important anymore. Information literacy is not going to be important anymore. When in fact, it actually made information much more readily available, and information literacy became really important. I remember back in college in the 1990s, having to go to the library and you have to read 10 books before you find the one book. And if you remember the microfilm and the microfiche and having to look through all that, what Google search engine and Yahoo did was made the information readily available. And because it was so readily available, information literacy became even more important. Identifying credibility and bias became really, really important because now we have all this information available at our fingertips. And then just most recently in the early 2000s, with cell phones becoming and the smartphone becoming the next best thing, we also felt like there was this this was going to change the way we might do teaching and learning. And while there is some change, it's not like it's going to completely remove some of the things that we need to focus on in the classroom. But why is this particular ChatGPT and AI, why are these things causing so much panic? Why are teachers, parents of schools panicking because of this? And I really think it's because of how fast and prevalent this tool has become. If you looked at Sam Altman, who's the CEO of OpenAI, the company that develops ChatGPT, he put out a statement, I think back in November, that 1 million people in the first 5 days of the release of ChatGPT downloaded it. And by January, that number had hit 100 million people. And so it's becoming very prevalent. So many more people are using it, and it's not allowed us to be able to adapt and really think it's happening so fast. Just for comparison, if you're to think about the telephone, it took about 75 years for that to reach 100 million people. So you can kind of see the difference there. And so in kind of thinking about how are schools reacting to this very fast technology, countries like Russia and China have blocked ChatGPT. Here in the United States, New York City public schools and Seattle public schools have banned it. Globally, different states and countries are scrambling to develop their stance on AI in the classroom. I was really interested to see what the International Baccalaureate will do. And I know a little bit ago they released a statement, and they also put out a video at one of the AI symposiums that Frankfurt International School published on YouTube. And in it, they're advocating that schools need to adapt and transform our educational programs and assessment practices so that students can use these new tools ethically and effectively. So there's a recognition that it might change some things about how we teach and how we assess, and that we really need to adapt and transform what we do in the classroom. What do we value in assessments? We really need to adapt and transform those things to be able to accommodate these tools. Dr. Glanville, the head of assessment principles and practice at the International Baccalaureate at the AI Symposium at Frankfurt International Schools, said that ChatGPT will help students focus on understanding what is important about a question or a problem. Students need to focus on thinking around the problem and being creative rather than seeking simple answers. So in that quote, I really want to focus on the idea of understanding and creativity, that those are things that we really need to be focused on when thinking about how these AI tools are going to enhance our teaching and learning. So in knowing that understanding and creativity are important skills and are important, what skills now do we need to focus on, right? And so I would love for you guys in the chat to think about that. And I know it's really hard to identify one or two skills, but I really want you to try to identify, if you had to choose one or two skills that every student in your school should master by the time they graduate, what would they be? Go ahead and take a minute and put that in the chat. So what is one or two skills that every student in your school should master by the time they graduate? What would they be? Take a couple of minutes to see the chat coming in. There might be a little bit of a lag, perhaps.
There is a slight lag as the chat catches up.
Yeah.
So I have to say.
So research skills, is that coming up on your screen as well? I see that.
Mm-hmm.
Yeah. Communication, creativity, thinking and research, critical thinking, again, critical thinking, evaluation. And I know it's really hard to find one skill. Build your own opinion. I see perseverance, adaptability. Yes, absolutely. Critical future ready skills. Yes, very good. This was actually a question that my school engaged in about 5 years ago. We were looking to engage in a conversation around what set of skills we felt every student should graduate having mastered these skills. And so might be known, you might have heard of of developing a portrait of a graduate for your students. And so we were engaged in this, and there are so many. If you look at all the skills we need to teach students, there's a ton of skills. And having to narrow that down to like maybe the 10 most important ones that you want every student to graduate your school with was a really hard task for us to do. And so we did a lot of research, and one of the things we looked up and we found was that the World Economic Forum produces and publishes a report about every 5 years called the Future of Jobs Report. I don't know if you're familiar with it. And it's really interesting because it does it every 5 years, and it just actually maybe a little less than a year ago, published a list of skills that they felt that companies are going to be looking for as students graduate and enter the workforce starting with 2025. But before I show you that list of skills, I thought it was actually kind of interesting to look back in history and see what they predicted were the most desirable skills in 1990. So I'm going to show you that list here, and I want you to really look at it closely. This is a list. This is the set of skills that the World Economic Forum said is going to be really desirable in 1990. So you could look at them and see, what do you notice? What are we prioritizing? What is included in this list that might surprise you? Or what might be missing? It's been a little bit more than 30 years later now. So you can see at the very top of that list, you have teamwork, problem solving, creative thinking is number 7, leadership. You have oral communication, listening, writing, computing, reading. These are all skills that in 1990 were the most desirable skills. So I want us to kind of focus on these 5 skills that I'm highlighting here: oral communication, listening, writing, computation, and reading. Obviously, we want our students to do that. We see the importance of that. They must be able to communicate. They have to be able to be good, active listeners. They have to be able to write. Doing computation and math is really important. And of course, reading is really important. It's really interesting when you compare this list with what they've predicted is going to be needed in 2025. So I'll put it up on the screen for just a second there, and I want you to really look at the difference. Compare that 1990 with the 2025. What do you notice has gone away? What are some things that have been added? And how does that compare with what you've identified as really important skills? If you look at the very top of that list, you have analytical thinking and innovation, right? You have skills like tech use, monitoring, control, tech design, programming, creativity is important. This idea of social influence is really important. But you'll notice that oral communication, listening, writing, computation, and reading are nowhere on this list. Why do you think that is? Why do you think these 5 skills are not on that list? Does that mean we no longer care about those skills? Or is there something else that's going on? I wonder. And really the answer, I think, when I look at this, what I think is that these are still very important skills, but they have become foundational. They're no longer that target. Our target isn't for students to just be able to read, write, compute, listen. But that the students need to go beyond that, right? We need to go way beyond that these became foundational. And in order to be able to analytically think and innovate, in order to be able to critically think, in order to be able to reason and problem solve, you need to have these as your foundation and your basics. But what I find really interesting, given this conversation we've been having around ChatGPT, and the difference between what a human being brings to the table versus an artificial intelligence is this idea of analytical thinking and innovation. This is what I think is really, really interesting and important about this list. So if we were to kind of recap everything and put it together, just kind of recap this beginning part of the masterclass, schools are experiencing the next evolution in technology. AI is here to stay. It ain't going anywhere. In fact, it's probably going to get better. It's going to probably do more than what it's doing now. Students are already using these tools, and so schools need to adapt the teaching, learning, and assessment. We talked about how creativity, analytical thinking, and innovation are high on the list of skills that need to be mastered. So how do we do all that? How do we bring all of this together? And in my opinion, it's no longer the teaching of the skill itself that's important, meaning it's that we don't stop there. We really need to focus on teaching for understanding. That needs to be our focus. We're reading and writing arithmetic, all of those things are the foundation, but we need to focus on teaching for understanding. What do I mean by that? And how does concept-based promote this idea of understanding in a literacy classroom? Now, I'm going to talk, and my examples are all going to be around literacy, but I really believe that these can be transferable ideas that can apply to any classroom that values reading and writing as a skill. So one of the things I did when preparing for this masterclass was I wanted to look at a set of skills that schools use. And here in the United States, the Common Core state standards are skills that a lot of schools use. And I wanted to look and see how much of those skills are all about writing. And I estimate, this is a conservative estimate, I think it's a little bit more than this, around 60% of those skills that are in the Common Core are centered around writing and that students need to master. And when I looked at what ChatGPT can do, it can actually do about 80% of those standards. So my question is, why might we still need to teach kids something that a machine can do? And I'm not arguing that we stop teaching writing, but the real question is, if a robot can do it, what is the human bringing to the table? And it's become even more important, in my opinion, that we go beyond just the teaching of content and skills, and that we must focus on teaching for understanding. That a robot might be able to do the writing, but it doesn't understand why it does what it does as a writer, as a reader, as a listener, as a speaker. That's what the human being brings to the table. And so I actually think that writing paragraphs and essays, while very important, and we absolutely need to teach that to students, it's no longer the target. It's not enough because it's so easy, a robot can do it now. What we need is to focus on why we do what we do as readers, writers, listeners, speakers, and viewers. And that's how we build the analytical thinking skills that I was talking to you about from that list, that will ultimately lead to innovation. And so if you think about the idea of concept-based, and if any of you have any knowledge around concept-based, you know that knowledge and skills are important to a concept-based curriculum instruction framework. They are the foundations. But our target is always that conceptual understanding and building that conceptual understanding. That's always been our target in concept-based. So the question then is, how do we build conceptual understanding? Well, what is conceptual understanding? I'll give a very brief summary here of what conceptual understanding is. At the core of conceptual understanding is the word concepts. And again, I'm going to give a brief explanation of concepts. If you want to delve more into this, definitely reach Tiffany's course on the foundations of concept-based literacy goes more into depth with this. But at its core, concepts are organizing ideas. They are mental constructs. And I'm going to talk about what a mental construct is in just a second. There's a short, little, simple rubric that you can use to determine if something is a concept or a topic, right? If it's a concept, it'll be timeless. It'll be universal. It'll be abstract to varying degrees, and it'll be represented by one or two words, and all the examples share common attributes. So I want you in the chat, I'm going to put up a word, argument. And I want you to tell me, is this a concept or is it a topic? And how do you know? Right? And try to use that rubric. Is argument a concept or a topic? Go ahead and put that in the chat for me. And you might want to ask yourself, is it timeless? Is it universal? Is it abstract? Is it represented by one or two words? And our examples share common attributes. Some people are saying it's a concept. I know there's a lag, so I'm gonna wait. Oh, lots of people are talking. Yep, absolutely. If you said it's a concept, you're absolutely correct. It is a concept because it is timeless, it is universal, and it is abstract. And if you look at all the examples of an argument, they all share common attributes. Okay. So now look at this one now. ChatGPT argument, or the ChatGPT argument. Is that a concept or is that a topic? Is it timeless? Is it universal? Is it abstract? And does it have examples that share common attributes? So the argument on ChatGPT, if you said it's a topic, you're right? Because now we've locked it into a specific, it's been locked in time, place, and situation. It's now about ChatGPT. So this right now is a topic. Again, if you want to delve a little bit more into the difference between a concept and a topic, you can definitely look at the Foundations of Concept-Based Literacy course. So that's what a concept is. It's timeless, it's universal, and it's abstract. So what's the difference between a concept and then conceptual understanding? If we think of concepts as mental constructs, what I mean by that is no longer a vocabulary word where students have to learn how to define it. It's not enough to know what is an argument. It actually is, what you need to do is know what it is and what it is not. What are the attributes and characteristics? What are some of the examples and non-examples? Are you able to create a mental image representation in your mind? When I say argument, when I say voice, when I say tone, when I say thesis statement, when I talk about sustainability or freedom, these are all concepts. Can you think of what freedom is and isn't? Its attributes, its characteristics. Can you create a mental image in your mind? Can you think of examples and non-examples? If the answer is yes to all of that, then you have now developed a conceptual understanding of that concept. And that's kind of the difference between that. When we talk about conceptual understandings, I wanted to show you some examples of some conceptual understandings. Again, I'm going to stick to that topic about argument. And I have here a conceptual understanding statement. Number one is the first one is from an older grade, kind of a high school level, and the second one is from an elementary school level. And so if you look at this statement, background knowledge, counter arguments, and a preview of the lines of reasoning and an introduction provides context for readers. In order for students to be able to write an introduction, they need to know that they have to have background knowledge, counter argument. They need to be able to preview the line of reasoning, but why? The understanding is about why, because it provides context for readers, right? And if you look at that and look at the second example, which is from elementary school, a topic sentence helps readers understand the main point of a paragraph. How many times have we taught in our elementary school classes the hamburger graphic organizer, where students might have a bun at the top, that's your topic sentence, the meat and the condiments in the middle, that's your evidence, that's your explanation, and then the bun at the bottom is your concluding sentence. And students might be able to generate that. They might be able to write a perfect paragraph, but can they tell you why they did what they did? Can they tell you what it looks like and how that paragraph would change if you didn't have a topic sentence, or if you didn't have a concluding sentence, or if you didn't have the points in the middle, right? Can they tell you why we do what we do as writers within a paragraph? And so that's what I mean by developing that conceptual understanding within this model. And so our target really is that students know why we do what we do as writers, as readers, as listeners, as speakers, and as viewers. And that they're able to bring the idea of being able to understand that concept, respond, critique, and produce in order to be able to explain, to have that full understanding. And in concept-based literacy, we actually take concepts and we organize them in a specific way to ensure and to maximize that conceptual understanding. And so how do we organize those literacy concepts? This is a framework that was created by Dr. Lois Lining, and what she says is that when we come to think about our concepts of literacy, we have to organize them according to these 4 strands: understanding text, responding to text, producing text, and critiquing text. You might look at this and say, well, wait a minute, where's the reading and the writing and the listening and the speaking and the viewing? What we believe in when we talk about concept-based is that reading, writing, listening, speaking, viewing are a means to the end, but they're not the actual ends themselves. Our ultimate goal isn't just to have students be able to read, write, listen, speak, and view. Our ultimate goal is that they need to be reading so that they can understand. They need to write or speak so they can produce. They need to read so they can critique. These are a means to the ends. And if students are able to do that, then they have a much better understanding of literacy concepts. So when I think about what is understanding text, these are concepts that students need to be able to construct meaning as a viewer, as a reader, as a listener. When I talk about responding to text, these are concepts that students need to respond as viewers, readers, and listeners. When I talk about critiquing text, these are concepts that students need to critique in order to be able to critique a text as a viewer, a reader, or a listener. And when I talk about producing texts, this is a list of concepts that students need to be able to produce texts as a writer and or a speaker. And so here are some examples that I wanted to show you. If we go back to that unit on argument and counter arguments, I might consider concepts like purpose, audience, structure, counter argument, and concession under understanding text. I'll give you an example. If I'm trying to develop an argument to an audience that might be resistant to my idea, is it better for them to come up with a counter argument, or is it better for them to come up with a concession, right? That might depend on my purpose, and that will affect my structure. And so having an understanding of that and how those concepts work together is what we want our students to ultimately be able to do. If we're using ChatGPT and we want students to, or they're already using it, might they not need to understand then their responsibility, that they're, as humans, are ultimately responsible for whatever they are bringing and they're producing? There might be also an element of collaboration where there is a human AI collaboration element there. And so they might need to understand that and understand the responsibility around that. If I'm thinking about producing text, that ultimate responsibility is to the human. They must make sure that whatever they're producing is accurate, is credible. So they must fact check. They must look at research. And then this is also where that element of creativity might come in. So these are all concepts that I might explore in a unit that I'm doing with my students. And so once I've kind of brainstormed these, came up with my understandings, I'm creating learning experiences for students that explore understanding as well as being able to develop that skill, I might come now to the idea of assessment. So now that I've taught conceptually, how do I ensure that I'm assessing for understanding? So I'm going to show you a couple of slides, and I want you to think about, is the task assessing for understanding, or is it not assessing for understanding? And so my understanding, again, I'm going to go back to that understanding that I showed you guys a little bit ago: background knowledge, counter argument, and a preview of the lines of reasoning in an introduction provides context for readers. I'm going to show you the task, and I want you to put in the chat, yes, it assesses for understanding, or no, it doesn't assess for understanding. Here's the task. So write an introduction for an argument essay about the benefits of recess. So does this task that I'm doing in my class assess for understanding or not? And there's that understanding there. You can put it in the chat. So is this assessing for understanding or not?
Just while they're putting that in the chat, Rasha, it's also a good time to remind people, if you've got questions, make sure you pop them into the chat as well, so that we can share those questions with Rasha at the end.
Okay, somebody says no. Okay, there is a bit of a lag, isn't there? It's kind of weird to see that happening. All right, good. If you said no, you're correct. It does not assess for understanding, right? What this does, it's assessing the skill of writing, right? If a student submits this to me, I now know they can write an introduction, I think, unless they got help from somewhere that I don't know about, right? But it doesn't assess why the student made the choices they made as a writer. And that's really important. So how do we design tasks to assess for understanding? And so this is what I would suggest we might add, is after writing an introduction for an argument, we might then ask students to write a paragraph, or to write a paragraph that explains the choices they made when writing the introduction that help provide context for the reader. Now, if they can explain the choices they made and how it provided context for readers, now I'm assessing for understanding, that they have come to an understanding of this generalization or this idea here. That's known as a craft report, and it's a really common part of a common attribute of a concept-based literacy classroom. And it doesn't have to be write a paragraph. It could be confer with a teacher. They could record themselves explaining it. They can present to the class. You know, writing a paragraph is just one of the tasks that they can do for that craft report. The ultimate thing that you're trying to get them to do is explaining the choices that they made and how those choices provide context for the reader. And that's what assessment for understanding is. So that's one thing, but then we now know students are using ChatGPT. So how can I modify? How do I assess for understanding when students are using tools for like ChatGPT? How would I modify that? Here's one example, and actually we were talking about this in my with my EdTech team and our English department a little bit. This might be one way of doing that, right? Assessing for understanding using ChatGPT. And when you're using ChatGPT, you still want to be able to assess. Students still need to be able to write the introduction. So you want to assess the skill and you want to assess the understanding. So I might have students write an introduction for an argument essay during class, right? They might, about recess, about whatever the topic is, they might do that during class so that I could see that they are able to actually produce an introduction with all the parts that need to be there. Now I want to assess for understanding, and this is where I might integrate and use ChatGPT. I might ask students to submit that introduction to ChatGPT and ask ChatGPT to revise the writing. Once I have that, I might then create have students write a craft report that explains whether or not the second draft is better than the first one and why. Maybe the student draft is better, maybe the ChatGPT is better, or maybe there are elements on both that are better. And the next step after that is they might analyze both drafts, compare and contrast to create criteria for a strong introduction. If students are able to walk through all this, they've used a tool to help them support their writing, but they're really focused again on the understanding, right? They're focused on showing their understanding of the importance of whatever elements you're trying to teach in that class. So what I actually did was I went to ChatGPT last night and I tried this out. I wanted to see what would happen. And so I have some examples for you guys just to kind of share again what you could do in your classrooms. I wanted to, and to also kind of explore this idea of the human AI hybrid collaboration. I went on ChatGPT's website and I created an account and I asked ChatGPT to write an introduction for an essay arguing the benefits of recess. And this is what it produced. Recess is a highly debated topic in education circles, with some arguing that it is a waste of valuable instructional time, while others insist that it is essential for children's social and academic development. While recess may seem like a time for mindless play and goofing around, it actually has many benefits that cannot be ignored. However, there are some who believe that the time spent on recess can be better used for academic instruction, and it's important to consider their perspective as well. It's a pretty solid introduction. It's a pretty good introduction that is written. I might have this and show it to a student and then ask them what's missing, right? So actually, as I was reading this, I was like, does it have background information? Does it have the counter argument? Is it previewing the line of reasoning? And I was thinking, it kind of has counter argument a little bit. While recess may seem like a time for mindless play and goofing around, it's kind of recognizing that counter argument. It maybe does preview a little bit of the line of reasoning in that last sentence, but and it has kind of it started talking about context, but really was missing kind of background information. In order for me to identify that, if I'm the student having this conversation, for me to even be able to identify that, that means I have to have an understanding of those three things. And I'm critiquing this piece with that understanding in mind. That in and of itself is an assessment of understanding. All by itself is an assessment of understanding. But I wanted to take a step further. And so I went back to ChatGPT and I said, okay, ChatGPT, I want you to revise the above introduction to include some background information. And this is what it came up with. Recess is a long-standing tradition in American schools, dating back to the late 19th century. It is a designated time during the school day for children to engage in unstructured play and physical activity, typically lasting 20 to 30 minutes. And then it went on with the rest of the paragraph that it did from before, while recess may seem like a time for mindless play, et cetera, et cetera. So now what do I do with this? It actually did include some really good background information about this debate in American schools, that it started in the 19th century. Recess is typically 20 to 30 minutes of unstructured and physical activity. So what can I do with this with students? I might look again for what's missing, right? Maybe I want to strengthen the counter argument. Maybe I really want it to review that line of reasoning more in that last sentence. I might look at this paragraph and say, I don't live in America. I live in Germany. So this doesn't really have a lot of context for me, right? I'm considering my audience. And so I might want to go do some research and say, what is What is the tradition around recess in Germany, right? And so as a student, again, I'm showing my understanding of audience. I'm showing my understanding of, and I want to maybe double check that fact. Is it really the late 19th century or not? So here I'm doing that responsibility for fact checking. One other thing I can do as a student, or I can as a teacher ask students, is to combine the best of both versions. And it doesn't have to be through ChatGPT. I might take these two versions and ask students, okay, if you had to merge these, if you had to work with these together and your own draft, what would that final product look? And that's ultimately what we're talking about when we're talking about a human AI hybrid collaboration. And there are so many other ideas that you could do. This is just one thing I did last night that was quite fascinating for me. And I was like, oh, this has a lot of really cool potential. But really the focus has to always be on providing evidence of conceptual understanding. We have to require students to have deep understanding of the concepts, in this case, that make a strong argument, and focus our assessments so that we're assessing on why we do what we do as readers, writers, listeners, speakers, viewers, and presenters. And that's really the ultimate kind of goal, whether we're using ChatGPT or using calculators in the classroom or using search engines. Really, we have to focus on the human understanding, or what we have students developing, that analytical thinking skills and that creativity. That's what they will be bringing to the table. If you want to know more and you want to delve a little bit more into concept-based, we do have the Foundations of Concept-Based Literacy course. I've actually taken that course a couple of times. It starts April 10th, and registration for that will close on April 5th. Tiffany is the lead presenter in that, and she really goes into much more depth on what does concept-based look like in a literacy classroom. So, and so I think it might be time for questions. Rachel?
All right. Thank you, Rasha. That was amazing. Just amazing to see. I love you were talking about this idea of humans collaborating with artificial intelligence. And as we think about those skills, that really requires that depth of understanding from the human in a way that ChatGPT or whatever, whether it's ChatGPT, I'm sure there'll be other products come along just as they have been in the past. I'm sure with all its kind of power and might, Google will be pretty quickly catching up with other solutions and things. But it's so interesting. Yesterday, when we were talking, you also mentioned this idea that ChatGPT is drawing on all of the information that's out there, but it might not be right. And when we talked about this piece around the American context, I actually kind of immediately after we had spoken, as you were preparing your presentation, I wanted to go, well, if it started in the late 19th century in America, when did it, what is the basis of recess? And then was looking back to citations for the similar idea of a break between lessons in England in the 17th century. And so it's that idea that just as we don't want students to trust anything they find on Google, we also need students to be able to kind of critique and analyze and understand this, and also just not take whatever it says as accurate information. So that's so interesting.
Yeah, I actually think with AI, that element that I, as an English teacher, I'm constantly trying to get my students to understand that they are responsible for what they put out there, and they need to be doing some fact checking. I actually think this is going to become a really important skill that students themselves are going to, just like we realize with Google, all that information being so easy at our fingertips, increase the idea of having to check like that information literacy. I think this is going to become something that students themselves are going to realize is important.
Mm-hmm. And sort of as the example went today, I think the idea of bias and perspective are going to become such important concepts as a part of this. You mentioned craft reports a couple of times, and I can see in the chat a couple of people have mentioned how powerful craft reports have been in their own school and how much of a highlight of writing tasks that has become since they've made that shift to adopting craft reports. Can you speak to that a little bit more? What is a craft report?
Yeah, so like I said in the master class, it really is a way to show student understanding, and so that students are able to explain the choices they made in any given, in anything really that you do in your classroom. In this case, writing. So many times I'll have students write essays or introductions, and the fact that they actually wrote it does not mean that they have the understanding of why they did what they did, right? They might have, if you'd given them a graphic organizer, they might have just followed that graphic organizer, and that's why they have that topic sentence, or that's why they wrote the thesis statement the way that it is, or that's why they might have the transitions that you told them that they needed to have. A craft report actually shows that understanding in which they are now explaining the choices they made. I wrote this, I put a topic sentence because that's what previews the paragraph, or I have transitions because it allows that fluency to happen, or I made this choice because of that. And so it's really a way to make that invisible thinking visible for the teacher, and to also assess the understanding. Like, did they get the big idea that I'm trying to provide context for a reader, or I'm trying to, summarize whatever that understanding might be? It actually will show that better when they explain their choices. And that's what a craft report really is. And it doesn't have to be in writing. It could very much be a dialogue with a student. It could be groups of students talking about their choices and comparing their choices. There's so many different ways of doing that.
So thanks, Rasha. There's also a question, and this is one that I know that we've had discussions around too, around plagiarism and what happens when students are using ChatGPT. How do we cite ChatGPT? Will tools like Turnitin or other plagiarism tools pick up ChatGPT or other artificial intelligence as plagiarism? Will they do that now? Or maybe will they be able to do that in the future, be able to pick up where artificial intelligence has supported that writing process? So any thoughts around artificial intelligence and I guess plagiarism and citation?
Yeah. So I think when ChatGPT first came out, I was doing some research, and then there was all these things I saw online saying, oh, this tool will pick up if somebody wrote it or not, or this tool will pick it up if there was an AI being used. And I actually don't think that that's true. And I think as we keep, as that tool gets better and better, so will, maybe Turnitin will be able to pick up plagiarism. But I actually think there's a debate now that I've kind of heard, it might not be pop, but there's a debate now that is that collaboration with the human and the AI plagiarism? Is it? And actually there is, and I forget her name. I think her name is Dr. Sarah Eaton from a university in Canada. She has a couple of, or you could just Google it, a couple of really interesting articles about post-AI plagiarism. That we're really going to have to rethink the way we think about plagiarism. And there's actually, if you look at MLA style right now, I think the last time I looked at it was maybe a few weeks ago, so maybe it changed. They don't actually have a way to cite ChatGPT yet. How do you cite that? And if it's this collaboration, so if I have these two pieces of writing and a student is combining it and bringing in their own ideas, how do you even begin to cite that? Like, I think that it's the next thing we need to think about, and it's because it was just produced in November, and we've not had time to actually explore that idea.
So I love though that we haven't had time to explore that idea, and that maybe that creates a interesting debate and conversation for our students. Maybe, just like the rest of the world, they can start to be weighing in on those conversations as we're all sort of catching up with this and exploring what that means.
Yeah, I think this will be a really cool topic for a TOK class.
Absolutely, it would be.
Cool. Yeah.
And I think that idea, maybe they can be starting to look at some of those articles as well and starting to produce some of their own kind of thoughts on this. And I love that you're embracing this, and that the IB are also saying, that this is okay, and we're not blocking this as that's a cheating tool, and actually really starting to think about this is the reality of these children's future. And so how do we help them not just take what ChatGPT produces, but actually use it as a tool for collaboration? And going back to, you mentioned partway through your presentation, those skills that are needed for the future. How does this change? How does this make that analytical thinking and that creativity? What is the role? I would love to put out to students. I think students, even at upper elementary, could start to wrestle with, well, what is the human role? What is what do you bring? What do people bring to a collaboration with artificial intelligence? And I think that's an interesting and powerful piece to be considering.
And I actually will even say, we talk about the skill of innovation being a skill students need to have by 2025. I actually feel like it's a skill teachers need to have now, because I remember just when I explored ChatGPT with in my school and with academic leadership in my school, and it was maybe the first time they'd heard about it and really seen examples of it. Like they'd heard about it, but actually seeing these examples like I'm showing today. And I remember one of our teachers, our department head, walking out and saying, okay, that's the end of, like, that's it. I have no idea what, like, just getting your mind wrapped around this is like, it's mind boggling. And so as teachers, we are going to be definitely engaging in that idea of innovating within the classroom. And if we adopt this idea of banning it, I actually believe that the harder you squeeze, the more will come out and people will look for other ways. So you might use Turn It In, you might use all these things. The students are going to use it, and you really need to adapt your assessment. And actually, it's really important. I think I'm not the one that said this, but I don't remember where I heard it. We have to think about what we value and assess what we value, right? Maybe that's going to shift. Maybe we used to value the skill of writing, right? And that's important, but we really need to now shift to valuing the understanding of how we write, as how we do this work as writers, as readers, as listeners, as speakers, etc.
So that's so powerful. I love that as an idea to be thinking that through. And when you say we need to think about how we adapt assessments, I love that your examples today weren't, so we need to stop letting them type on a computer and we need to make sure it's all done in the classroom with a pencil and paper. And that your examples of adapting assessment are actually about embracing these tools that will be available to them. And not only are they possible, they should be, if they can shortcut a process, thinking about this kind of in the future as adults, if you can shortcut your writing process by using a tool like this, shouldn't we be doing that? And then how do we make sure that that piece of writing is still fit for our audience, fit for our purpose? And that's the piece that, again, a little bit like I think back to all the skills around search engines. And a search engine is only as good as what you put into the search. And so students, just as they need to be able to put the right things into their Google search, they need to be able to not only ask ChatGPT the right original question, but you and I have worked together in the past in sort of exploring the capability of ChatGPT and looking at, and then we ask this, and then we would ask this, and then we would ask this. And then at what point do we stop asking ChatGPT and go away and do our own research?
Yeah.
To explore that. And so it's an exciting possibility for schools and for our students, and exploring what this looks like rather than sort of burying our head in the sand and saying, we'll figure out ways to block it. So,
and actually,
we're thinking. Now, go ahead.
No, I'm sorry. I think there was a lag, so I thought you were done. So
no, you go ahead.
Yeah. So I was actually thinking, like, when I was doing this, I was thinking, gosh, how many times has technology come out with something that actually was time saving? And at the time we're like, oh my God, it's going to be the end of this and it's going to be, but releasing that and giving that time back to us to be able to focus on what's really important. Right. I mean, think about, I was actually just thinking the other day, my husband, we just moved into a new home about a year ago, and it's pretty large and it gets all dusty and whatnot. And I'm used to like sweeping and when guests come in, you sweep and you clean and you do all this stuff. And we bought a narwhal, which is like this robot that sweeps and cleans for you. Right. And so I used to have to plan for time to, like, I'm going to sweep the floors and I have to wait, and then wipe the floors and you have to wait, and then nobody can walk, right? Nobody can do anything. And so you're losing time on preparing food and maybe creating a menu. And you're so exhausted that when guests come, you're ready to sleep and they just came. And so I was thinking, like, wow, like this robot released me from having to do this. I understand I know how to sweep. I know how to do all that. I understand the importance of it, but do I actually need to do it myself? No, it freed me to be able to concentrate. And I know this is like a really, like, it's not a classroom example, but it's an example of how technology can make things, can free us from our time, and free our time to do more important things. And so I wonder how much we as teachers can use this, or our students can use this, to really free that cognitive load and allow us to really pay attention to the important understandings that we need to have.
Yes, absolutely. In the chat, somebody has said that it has said writing should resonate students' identity. And I think that's also really powerful, thinking about the concept of identity and voice in writing. And so it's that idea that these ideas and the identity and the voice still have to come through. And that's going back to that idea of a collaboration and using these tools as inspiration, that humans will inspire artificial intelligence. But an article that you shared with me also really pointed out that humans will gain inspiration from artificial intelligence as well. And so to still find your voice in that and explore identity within that, but use these as a tool for inspiration.
Yeah.
So someone has mentioned in the chat, as long as you still learn those sweeping skills.
Yes. And understand why it's important.
And understand why it's important. And when you're camping or visiting a friend and there is no little robot to turn on, you can still, and I think that's important too, that those skills are important, because there are times when it's not going to be appropriate to use the tool. And of course, it's the same thing with a calculator. There are moments, I remember, I've said this before, I remember my high school mathematics teacher, when we said, why are we learning this? They said, well, you're not going to have a calculator in your pocket everywhere you go when you grow up. Well, actually, you're wrong. I do.
Yeah.
It doesn't mean I always want to pull out my calculator, right? There are times when it would be kind of embarrassing to have to do some adding on my calculator when we're adding simple things. So there are also times when you definitely don't want to have to ask an AI to write something down for you. So it is an interesting idea to explore.
Yeah, I think there's a comment in the chat that I think is interesting to think about. So much tech has overpromised and underdelivered. Let's see how this progresses. And I really think we've just not had time yet to see what this will look like. And we've just some of us have reacted so quickly, and we just need to kind of take a minute, take stock, and recognize that it's out there and we can't ignore it anymore, and see what happens.
So, all right. Well, thank you so much for your time today, Rasha. This has been an inspiration to me to watch you put this together and prepare this. And there was also a question in the chat around the literacy course. Is it appropriate for elementary or primary teachers? Yes, absolutely. It is designed for K-12 and has examples from across the curriculum, if you're interested in that. Thank you, everyone who has shown up today and participated in the comments. We really appreciate your time and your own commitment to lifelong learning. It's great to be able to connect with you again. So thank you, everyone. Hopefully we'll see you next time. We're trying to make these a very regular occurrence. So watch out for the next masterclass.
Yeah.